means I got the clickbait. Shoot.
There you go.
You know what I didn't do?
What was that?
Here I go. Let's see. Oh, what did I see there? Okay, I'm running late on this. Let's see. This meeting is being live streamed. Okay, good.
I think you just launched it. Here we
I
are.
did. I did.
So there we are.
Nice.
Oh, right.
Live from Austin, the misinformation capital of Texas. This is the Plutopia Happy Hour. Our guest tonight is Robert Matney, and our foreign correspondent, Maggie Duvall, is in house and soon to appear. I'm Scoop Sweeney, and over my head as usual, and that guy over there is John Lebkowski. Hello, John.
In over your head?
And what a head it is, eh?
You got a halo over your head, Scoop.
Last time I
Oh, wow. You shifted perspective.
I'm kind of shifty. Last time I
I've
saw a
never
head
seen
like
you.
that, it was on a beer. But seriously.
Well, let's not blow it off.
Okay, we've set the intellectual tone for today.
Oh, yes, indeed. Well, Rob Matney is our guest. Rob is VP of Strategic Partnerships at Yonder. And he's worked as a social media analyst and practitioner, web developer, actor, and theater director. He's a great actor. And he makes regular visits to join us here on Plutopia. And when he's around, we often discuss misinformation and disinformation in social media. So this is where we are tonight. We were going to have a little discussion about a big subject. Hey, Rob.
Hey, John. Hey, Scoop. It's good to be here. Looking forward to Maggie joining us. I'm definitely uncertain about that great actor bit, but definitely certain about the sometimes an actor bit.
I've seen you act. You're pretty good.
I appreciate it. And happy to be here talking about disinformation
and whatever else.
Social media influence mechanics and all of that.
You can't find a good influence mechanic when you need one.
No, they never fix anything, do they?
Before we start, who's that peeking over your shoulder?
I mean, so this is one of a set of paintings. Behind it are 4 other paintings. And this one is of a friend named Sarah. And the paintings were made for a play that I directed many years ago at the Long Center here in Austin. And in the play, there was a painter and there were a couple of models, and there needed to be representations of the paintings that were made during the course of the play.
I hope they didn't have to paint a new painting every night.
I mean, in order to evade that significant difficulty, we had a very qualified painter paint all the paintings that needed to be painted, and then we represented it in video, presented over the actors in real time. So,
interesting.
Sort of gave a sense that it was being done every night, but it was not being done every night.
Do you have a play that is being staged about now or near now that you want to plug, even though you may not be in it?
What a good tee up. So my dear spouse, Liz, is a director, and she is currently running a production from a company called Pinfold. It's a production of Schaffer's Amadeus, which is the source material for the very famous movie called Amadeus. And it's a little bit different from the movie. There's some subtle differences in terms of how it's written. And this staging is distinctly different from the staging of the movie. And it is running, open last weekend. It runs this weekend. It's running next weekend. Mostly it's playing at a theater called the Ground Floor Theater, though on Sunday it is playing up in Georgetown, and it will be backed by a full orchestra playing the full work of Amadeus.
That would be amazing.
That's the one.
Yeah.
That's the one. And the work as it's done in Austin at ground floor, though it is not backed by an orchestra, has its own really very interesting contours that make it worth seeing for sure without that orchestra behind it. So I recommend both.
Oh, that sounds great. So we said we were going to talk about disinformation to some extent tonight, and I think we should start by making the distinction between misinformation and disinformation. Do you want to make that distinction for us?
Sure. I mean, as happens often, new words enter into the lexicon, and then they kind of get formalized what their meaning is, right? And so the current read on the distinctions between misinformation and disinformation is misinformation is inaccurate information that is out there and maybe being shared online, whereas disinformation is inaccurate information that is being shared conscious of the fact that it is inaccurate and to an effect with an agenda behind it.
Absolutely. And we see some of that these days, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's worth establishing that I think that all of this lives in a context of what some people refer to as information warfare. And information warfare does not necessarily need to rely on accuracy or inaccuracy, right? When it comes to persuading people for or against a position, you can use subterfuge to spread things that are at least partially true. And that is one of the maneuvers that is commonly used. So I think misinformation and disinformation are important terms. And also I want to divorce leveraging of information for impact from the question of veracity. That they're all interrelated, but they're distinct and can be and should be considered distinct.
Well, I have a question. Who would have who would have known that something like Meta or Facebook would actually divulge misinformation? Well, I found out that they had a software bug that was inadvertently, here's big quotation marks around inadvertently, amplifying misinformation on Facebook, including a lot of Russian media got a big boost up, and they just, this was reported by The Verge yesterday. That sounds exactly like the stuff that they were saying wasn't happening.
For sure. And I in addition to that, there was yesterday the breaking news about Meta paying a marketing firm to strategically damage the reputation of TikTok. And they leverage not only online discourse, but also traditional media through op-eds, et cetera. So it was a really sort of comprehensive information operation, right? From, that was leveraging lobbyists, traditionally political entities, but then also launching that agenda into the discourse space online and the traditional broadcast media space through written publications.
So how do you diss TikTok other than maybe just telling someone to go watch it for 5 minutes, and that will carry you right there?
I mean, listen, I hear you, but also I don't agree. I have whiled away many a pleasing hour fiddling through TikTok. It kind of depends on what you get served up, which is sort of the truth of all of these platforms. It can be quite fantastic, or it can be horrible, and it sort of depends on what you get served up, which is really the rub, isn't it? Right. But the narrative that they were proposing and that they propagated was that a number of really toxic trends started on TikTok, and therefore TikTok was corrupting the youth, right? Was corrupting the children, and therefore China was corrupting the children, et cetera, which is a pretty easy wedge political issue to make. And the fact of the matter is that one of the trends that they were marketing as having happened didn't exist. It wasn't a thing until they started putting it in op-eds. And two, the other one actually originated on Facebook and then propagated to TikTok. And look, there's plenty of toxic trends that can emerge on any platform, including TikTok. So yeah. I don't feel the need to particularly defend TikTok here. I'm just saying what they were propagating, what Meta was paying money to propagate, was explicitly inaccurate, and in one case, actually deflecting from a problem that they had failed to detect.
I'd like to get back to the concept of this as kind of like information warfare. So there's disinformation that people are spewing in a relatively disorganized way, but in information warfare, it's what you would call strategic disinformation, right? I mean, there's a clear strategy behind it and a clear set of goals for it, right? And didn't that pretty much originate within Russia many, many years ago? I mean, as propaganda before we had social media?
Yeah, I mean, yes, and forgive me for the liberal yes-anding. Certainly propaganda has been a part of human civilization and strategic operating at a local and geopolitical level for as long as we've been humans. And it appears to me that Russia was the first to really leverage the scope and scale of the internet for propagandistic purposes, and coined the phrase disinformation as a borrowed word from English that didn't exist in English, that they then give back to English. So the Russian term is disinformatsiya, and then it becomes disinformation back in English.
But that term originated way before social media, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it has early usages, and whether or not the term is used, it has intentional patterns that match what we see now, going at least as far back as the Bolshevik Revolution, where we see intentional reframings of narratives at massive scale, farmed out to a global network of information sharers, in an effort to bring about a global revolution, right? So, there was a very clear agenda. I think it's easy to argue that at least some believed in the beneficence of that global agenda, and then information was one of the weapons. And I mean, I think it's worth remembering that in that war and in subsequent wars, there is an asymmetry of power, right? And so if we think about, global conflicts where traditional warfare has been interrupted by guerrilla warfare, that has traditionally been in the context where there was an asymmetry of power. Similarly, in the sort of global construct, disinformation is a meaningful weapon, in particular where there's an asymmetry of other powers. And so we've seen innovative usage of propaganda from Russia in response to the fact that it's fighting asymmetric and global warfare.
Is it possible that the United States has also spread disinformation in other countries?
I mean, there's no question that the U.S. Has taken advantage of propaganda, for sure. I don't think that it is my experience and my understanding that the U.S. has not participated in propaganda at scale online in the way that Russia has. And I think that there's, it's reasonable to think that that may come to an end. Like there's no context wherein major powers are not going to leverage the same kinds of weapons that are being used against them over time.
Right.
So,
Fight fire with fire.
what? Say that again.
Fight fire with fire.
Yeah, exactly. So while I think that it hasn't happened in the past at scale in an interesting way, I'm not going to be terribly surprised if it starts getting used in the future. And that raises important questions.
Yeah, I used to hear on shortwave radio a lot of United States-based propaganda, things like Radio Free Europe, the broadcast to Cuba from from the mainland U.S. aimed at destabilizing the Castro regime. And I used to listen to that stuff, and some of it was just downright strange. I mean, talk about conspiracy theories. They were floating quite a few, and this was pre-internet. But back in those days, a lot of people in different countries, shortwave radio was the only way you got a lot of information that wasn't just purely local.
Sure. I mean, absolutely. The question is there a distinction in sophistication and in scale when we get to the internet? And I think the answer is yes, but the point you make is right. I mean, we've been engaged in trying, and by we here, I mean the US government, and we may as individuals participate in that in various degrees, but certainly the US government has participated in seeking to persuade populations to its vision of what the right civilization is for a very long time, for sure.
And now that same shortwave radio band has been taken over as the same as the AM radio band in the United States, which was taken over basically by conservative talk radio. If you go and listen on shortwave, it's very conservative, very evangelical Christian broadcast that are using huge transmitters, a lot of them out of Ecuador and other places that don't have any real regulations on power, and they can be heard worldwide. And there's some very strange information coming out, and it's basically the evangelical conservative talking points.
I didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me at all. It is certainly one of, I mean, it shares two attributes that make it vulnerable to being something that is a topic set that's going to be targeted. And that is that it has a lot of true believers, passionate true believers. And also it's a cultural wedge. So the people who believe it are likely to go in whole hog on it. And people who are willing to cynically leverage it in order to cleave and polarize are also going to leverage it. And that means that it's a real opportunity to make something seem bigger than it is. And that, I think, at the heart of it, at the heart of propaganda full stop, but exacerbated significantly on the internet, is one of the problems. How do we human scale the set of opinions that are being propagated, right? And so, propaganda, if we think of it abstractly, is a way of saying this nation of X number of people believes Y, right? And we want you to believe Y. But finally, no group is hegemonic in that way, right? They have a set of perspectives, right? And so the opportunity to say, no, this nation believes X is always a lie, right? And so the internet exacerbates that problem and says, hey, listen, it's really opaque how many actual humans are behind this. Also, how many humans came by that information in a way that's meaningful. Was there enough friction between them receiving that information and then propagating that information to actually reflect that they believe it? Or was it just really easy to click the retweet? Like, all of these things make it opaque and difficult to get a sense for how many humans are behind the position. And of course, the thing that's the real stinker behind that is that humans are often persuaded by their perception of how many people are behind it. So it's a real chicken or the egg problem. If you can give a sense that there's a massive number of people behind a thing, then you are definitely more likely to persuade a larger number of people to become true believers. And there's the rub, right? There's the rub that's so difficult to get rid of, because once it's been spread with the perception of numerical weight, now it often has numerical weight. And now it's something that we need to pay actual legitimate attention to. And then the cycle goes on and on.
Well, we have info wars, which is right in that category of making it seem like it's bigger than it really is, but actually it's become quite large. But it's right here in beautiful Austin.
I mean, I was in my dorm at Jester Dormitory, occasionally coming in late from the library or something less noble of a night, and turned on the TV to while away myself to sleep and listened to that jackass spew his vitriol, and thought, here's this jackass. And here, quite a lot of years later, a lot of people think he's onto something. It's the age-old issue of the snake oil salesman, and it is a sad statement that he is a wildly successful salesperson of some horseshit snake oil. And now he's got, jackass podcasters in Austin moving into a line with him. It's a real problem.
I just wonder what he's selling.
I mean, vitamin supplements. That's the thing, is that, people, in many cases, behind conspiracy theories, there will always be follow the money. Big pharma is after X, right? And listen, major industries, in my opinion, have behaved poorly and put profits before people and done terrible things. I'm not going to try to whitewash that for a minute. But when you actually follow the money, you also find a bunch of grifters like Alex Jones, who are also just grifters. They're not making billions, they're only making millions on vitamin supplements that don't do anything for anybody. It's at the end of the day, it almost always is just a grift. And so is Putin and his regime. They're just a wildly successful grift.
It's an odd thing. I just tried to look at the InfoWars store and it presented me with a CAPTCHA just in order to get into their store and look at it. I was wondering about
Are you
that.
a robot, John? Did you prove it?
I am most certainly a robot, but don't tell anybody. Maggie's here.
Hey, Maggie.
Maggie.
Hola.
Are you a robot?
Sorry I'm late. It was a bit of a schlep up the mountain, but I'm back. I'm here.
Okay. You have to prove that you're not a robot, though. We're doing
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Get past that CAPTCHA. So we're talking about disinformation. Heard any good disinformation lately?
Well, I was, I won't say where we were in Santa Fe, but it had something to do with women's health. And it had to do with certain tools to help with women's health. And I was, as we were driving up, I was thinking of all the anti-vaxxers out there and all the, essential oils cure everything people and all that, who are so anti-science. And I said to my daughter, I wonder what they think about birth control. So is that bad science? Is that evil science? Or, anyway, so because what the disinfo I'm interested in a lot these days is the whole conspirituality stuff, because there's so many people I know that were and are involved in wellness and yoga and all that, and they've, in my mind, completely gone off the deep end.
Yeah, they're following QAnon. Yeah,
Huh?
they're following QAnon now. A lot of
Right.
a lot of the QAnon followers are coming from what we used to refer to as the New Age, I guess, movement.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's one of the. I know, John, that you're moving us to QAnon, and for let's go there. And it is an easily forgotten fact that the origins of the anti-vax movement were not with right-wing nut jobs. It was left-wing nut jobs.
Absolutely.
Right.
It was a profile that sometimes I and some colleagues refer to as the health rangers, super organic, suspicious of the establishment. And there's good reasons to be suspicious of the establishment, suspicious of big pharma. There's reasonable reasons to be suspicious of big pharma, and who got caught up in the wreck of research that Dr. Wakefield did.
Yes, Doctor.
Associated a particular set of vaccines with autism. And of course, that research would go on to get debunked. It would go on to get shown that actually data was falsified. Not only was it not reproducible in the scientific method, in the way that things should do, where you have a finding, you do research, you have your findings, and maybe they're valid. But if they're not reproducible over time, they're not valid. That's all good science, right? You can do something that you had every reason to think was valid, that turns out not to be valid because a large enough sample set disproves it, right? And that certainly turned out to be true, and rapidly. But in Wakefield's case also, it was the case that he was shown to have falsified data. And if you want to follow the money, just look at Wakefield's grift. He's been making tons of money ever since, right? So, but it was left-wing folks that kind of rallied behind him. And then
there's also Joseph Mercola,
right?
Dr.
Natural
Mercola,
News,
who I'm less familiar with. I know some about.
It's a similar thing, yeah.
And then,
sorry, could you say that again?
there's my
Boy,
well, and
criticism.
And just to add, I don't want to break your flow, Rob, but I read something the other day as I was flying back from Austin, and I was like, oh my God, you're right, about how Oprah has been at, like this. She has promoted Dr. Oz, Jenny McCarthy, who did the whole, autism thing. Dr. Phil, she's been behind so many of these, wellness grifters. I'm like, it's all Oprah. Anyway, I just thought that was really interesting.
I mean, it is. I sometimes petulantly refer to Deepak Chopra Winfrey and Deepak Chopra Winfrey's secret as one of the great grifts. That said, I personally, this is just a personal opinion, think that probably Oprah has her heart in the right place, and she's just seeking for truth and is being misled by grifter after grifter.
Right.
I don't know if that's true. I don't know Oprah Winfrey. I never will know Oprah Winfrey, but my little intuition tells me that she's just trying to get good things to people.
I think she is too. It's just unfortunate because she is such a voice. She's such an influencer. She's like the influencer, right? So, it's started these people off and on. Anyway, so I just wanted to throw that.
Yeah, I don't think Oprah's so much a evil being. I think she has a staff that probably has some folks who have questionable intentions, because someone in a position like hers depends on a big staff of writers and producers who have to bring in information. And a lot of times you can't really vet that stuff because it comes in kind of on the fly, and that happens to media people all the time.
Who's running the show right now? Not this show, but the show.
The show.
Who's in charge now?
Oh, goodness. like big in charge? Are you asking?
Big in charge, yeah.
I mean,
Because I'm starting to really wonder about that. We used to assume that, well, we assumed all sorts of things, including, conspiracy theories that there was some cartel pulling strings, the Illuminati.
Yeah.
But we seem to be in a period of real chaos. And it's like, when Trump was elected, people thought we were being wounded, but I think it was more like a scab was being scraped off of an existing wound, and suddenly we could see all the germs. I mean, we could see all the crazy that's out there, that it was there all along, but it's amplified now, and it's completely visible to us through various forms of social media. And I think that's maybe one of the things social media has accomplished. Not that it caused a bunch of people to go crazy, but it caused a bunch of crazy people to get a platform.
Yeah, so you're saying Trump was a scrap, a scab scraper.
Yeah, well,
I've been starting to
scraped, I guess.
I've been starting to research a lot of like what was happening during times of great change. I think of the Luddite movement, things like that, where people just lost their shit basically because there's all these unknowns and there's nothing to hold on to, and it seems like fertile ground for all these kind of things to go on. I'm trying to search through history for other, things.
I mean, what I like about your example is that it's, it's a reactionary movement, right? And there's a friend that John and I have, and Maggie, I think you do too, named Bijoy, who sometimes observes that when he has used the metaphor, and I hope I'm not misquoting him badly, but when the engine gets too far from the caboose, that the center can't hold, and there's going to be a break, there's going to be some sort of significant schism. And so in these periods of rapid change, then you have to we must expect, if we look at history, that there is some sort of reactionary movement that kind of clings to the past, right? And certainly Luddism was that explicitly. And I feel like, there's a lot of really rapid change in a lot of different directions, and we can drill into a few of them, right? And I mean, for example, the rapid movement that is nonetheless overdue around trans rights is clearly rendering an opportunity for people who are terrified of gender ambiguity to wield their political force, and for political opportunists who sniff that to use it to get legislation passed in Florida and in Texas that is seeking to make it a crime to be trans, and to some degree already seeing some success in that. And I think that's clearly about people saying, wait a minute, I don't know much in this crazy world, but I know that there's two genders, right?
Right.
And I mean, the secret that I, if I were Deepak Chopra Winfrey, the secret that I would propagate is that we're all in a yawning maw of multivalenced ambiguity at all times, and your adorable desire to split things into binaries is really cute.
Right.
Time for you to just accept that isn't existence. So give that up, be at peace with it, and now let's skate in a multivalent world full of indefinite ambiguity.
Right.
I don't think people will hear me on that one. I mean, if there's one thing that humans are, it's very good at creating a sense of certainty out of ambiguity.
Right. You mentioned political opportunity here. People in Texas seem to be masters of that whole thing. How do we explain ourselves? I mean, we're Texans too, but we have Paxton and Abbott and Patrick and all these people just making all sorts of insane, conspiracies against, liberty and freedom and the democratic way or whatever. Uh, how did we get to this? I grew up in Texas, but it was crazy, but it wasn't this crazy.
Well, they're just think about the Luddites. The Luddites were very practical, self-interested people. They weren't just against technology per se. They were against the technologies that were going to take their jobs away. And that's why they started destroying the machinery. Mm-hmm. And these guys that you see, like take Paxton and Abbott, are really good examples. They can see that they can leverage positions to energize a base that will help keep them in power and that will help enrich their coffers, right? They're just grifters. I mean, I think these guys probably don't believe half of the crap that they spew, but they have people in their base, what we call the base, that absolutely believe those things and absolutely worry about or are afraid of certain things. Again, the non-binary thing is very threatening to some people. So what that means is that you can energize people by coming down really hard binary versus non-binary, and you get them on your side and they start sending you money for your campaign and they start voting for you and giving you power. It's all about money and power. It's all, I mean, you can pretty reliably figure that all of these politicians on the right that are, well, politicians on the right and the left, the things that they're talking about, the things that they're saying in order to get votes and get contributions.
Yes.
And I'm not cynical at all.
I mean, yes. I'm more comfortable with the getting votes bit than the getting contributions bit. I feel like there's a reasonable argument to be made of like, well, actually, maybe in a representative democracy, people should be carving out the positions that will just get them the most votes, so long as they then act on that, right? So long as they then follow through on that as a policy approach.
Well, I brought up the money thing specifically thinking about Trump and some of Trump's followers who clearly seem to be about trying to raise money and then figure out ways to funnel that money into their own coffers, which is dishonest and probably illegal, but they're doing it, Yeah. So that's one aspect. There probably are some true believers in there too.
I mean, I think it's a false equivalency to set, Trump and the build the wall grift, right? Where it was just straight up theft of money, right? Like, hey, listen, for reasons of swamp, we couldn't build the wall, but don't worry, we the people are going to build the wall. Just send us your hard-earned money and we're going to build the wall. And then they just walked away with the money, right? Like it is, I think, a false equivalence to say, well, yeah, but there's people on the right and the left who do that, and people in history who do that. Not that you were saying that, mind you, but like that's at the very least uncommon in American history. Like that's the kind of thing that we see in countries that are not our country, and it's unusual, and we should treat it as fundamentally different. I mean, the Trump grift is the most grift of modern history in America, and maybe full stop history in America.
Yeah, I've never seen anything quite like it. I was going to ask you about Russiagate, as they call it, this idea that Trump was somehow influenced by or in league with Russians and so forth. And I know people who swear that that's not correct. Um, uh, some of them are dubious, Glenn Greenwald, people like that. But there are people who honestly believe that that was just a hoax and it was, pardon the pun, trumped up. But right now, it's starting to look like maybe there was some real substance to that. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, and it's not new news to anyone who's actually paying attention to the facts. We know that there was a non-trivial amount of money budgeted for the influence operation. Now, where the gap is, and this is not where most people get to, it sure as heck is not where Glenn Greenwald and his ilk get, but where the gap is that to what degree can you prove that all that targeted paid advertising, all that targeted and fabricated organic activity where hundreds of thousands of personas were spun up over a period of time, participated in cultural and social groups, organized protests that those personas never showed up at because they were not in the country, but those protests then still happened. Like many millions of dollars were spent on that. But the thing that you cannot prove is to what degree did that move the dial on a person voting X versus Y? And you're never going to get that. And so people kind of throw up their hands and they're like, yeah, but you can't prove that that changed any single person's vote. And there is truth to that. But I promise you, those many millions of dollars were not spent without an intended effect. And then they weren't spent again without believing that they were successful. Now, so there's a gap there. You can't jump from a digital space to the ballot box. Thank God you can't. But there was certainly an effort, and anyone who claims that there wasn't an effort is just ill-informed or an asset, knowingly or unknowingly.
Well, I'll bring up the elephant in the room, not being a GOP pawn or anything. Fox News, how do you explain that? And how are they going to continue with the serious defections that have been happening? You know, people like Shepard Smith, Chris Wallace, and all those people that were, really, sympathetic to Fox have suddenly gone away, and a lot of their staff is leaving. And basically, it's become the Tucker Carlson network. And you talk about your misinformation, disinformation. Tucker's the king.
I feel like because I've never been in a position to collect or analyze that data, I don't have any sort of insight from a data perspective. I don't have any insight on, what sort of coordination might have been in place. I just don't know. I mean, it certainly seems to me, just as, Rob Citizen, that the network has determined to triple down on its connection to a particular party and to say, this is our way of being successful, and then just staying the course, to such a degree that I think it appears like the propaganda arm of a particular party in a way that is different in kind, so different in degree that it's different in kind from, say, an MSNBC, which is clearly partisan, right? Like, I don't think it's controversial to say MSNBC, it clearly, reliably takes a partisan line. I'm a fan of Maddow's research, by the way. I think she is rigorous. I think she's quite a marvelous thinker. And also, overall, MSNBC toes a party line. But the difference between MSNBC, which of the main TV news channels is, I think, the worst offender, on the left, the difference in kind is so significant. Like Fox is in a league of its own, it seems to me. But that's just me calling it from being someone who consumes the news, not having looked at any data at all.
So I'm curious about something that my daughter brought up today. She's a great peruser of TikTok and has passed on some pretty amazing things to me. So I have a different perspective on it. Whereas I see a lot of my peers like wringing their hands in horror at this, what TikTok is doing to the children and all that. Well, she shared with me this morning the news that broke like on the Washington Post all over the place about that Facebook or Meta has been paying one of the biggest Republican consulting firms in the country to orchestrate a nationwide campaign seeking to turn the public against TikTok, which includes placing op-eds in news outlets, promoting dubious stories about TikTok trends, so on and so forth. Just reading this news this morning brought up so many things, like the warning bells and so many different levels. Again, because I would try to, this kind of ties in to the other conversation my daughter and I have had, where, she said, "Hey mom, remember when I was a kid and in school, we had to learn internet safety, media literacy, all this stuff." And she goes, "Why the hell weren't our parents learning this? Why weren't our grandparents?" So the kids today know more about what's going on than the adults that were so terrified of what was going on. And they're the ones like wringing their hands at anyway. So I just thought that was fascinating. So I wanted your thoughts on some of this, Rob.
I mean, on that last point you made, I've heard someone say really elegantly, and I'm going to paraphrase it and degrade in my paraphrasing. So forgive me, whoever was the origin of this. Say something really, really economically about how Fox News turned my parents into what they told me video games would turn me into.
Right.
That's the SAT question there, right?
That's right.
There was a period of terror. Like, there's a bunch of new media. What will it do to my children?
Right.
And it's borne out that, well, it's been a mixed bag with the children, but for you, it's really screwed you up. You were the one who was defenseless person.
Totally.
I mean, defenseless might be overstating the case, and it certainly isn't uniform. But I think, I think that's the problem, is that we're scared of what we're vulnerable to, right? Mm-hmm. And our children may or may not be vulnerable to what we're scared of. They may be, right? But we're always going to be scared of what we're vulnerable to. And I think those people were, and now they're getting taken for a ride by things that they simply don't understand. Right. It is time and again that I have conversations with people, and I'm, explaining the very idea of followers for hire, right? The fact that there's, marketplaces where you can just go and buy 1,000 followers, right? Like, right. That as a concept, it is difficult to get unless you understand a number of things that approach it, right? And so if you don't understand how that could happen, like, what does it even mean, then you can't understand it. And then you can't understand that consensus could be entirely fabricated. And if you can't understand that consensus is entirely fabricated, you certainly can't get the more nuanced position that it might be partially fabricated in a way that's influential enough to get you, right? Right. So I think there's a real generational divide there. I don't feel skeptical about the kids. I just feel like, can we just get the power to the kids? If we can just do that and retire ourselves out of the equation, probably things will be okay if we just don't screw it up so bad in the meantime. Right. I'm cognizant of efforts to train the children which makes me particularly worried about the legislation lately around what's happening in the schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
Right.
problem with, forgive me, Godwin, who may very well watch this at some point. The problem with the Nazi regime is bad enough, but the problem is multiplied by the Hitler Youth, right? That's where the problem becomes the real problem, the problem that can get you over time, right? And so anyways, I think the kids are probably fine so long as we don't harm the education and create a situation where there's a residual issue. And the shenanigans that Meta got up to with regards to TikTok is horrible. We're in a situation where they're not the only corporation that acts like a nation state. And in this regard, they have been acting like a nation state with propagandistic goals at play, because they're the size of a nation state, and so are a number of others. And so how do we prevent that? I don't know the answer to that. And also, I don't wring my hands about the content on TikTok. I think some of it's very enjoyable. I just very quickly scroll past the things that are clearly a problem, and I'm training the algorithm to be better for me.
Right.
I think the Who got it right, that the kids are all right. The grown-ups are, but the kids, they're okay.
Yeah.
We won't get fooled again.
Yes, we will.
Well, there's a part of this, and I brought it up before. I'm frightened of the fact that my peers are now turning into the brandishing their slipper at an unknown, threat from the sky. And like, when did we turn in? Oh my God, I'm that age now. Like, please, I told Hunter, put me away somewhere if I start talking like that.
And we are not doing that. We are not.
I mean, there is. There's a really wonderful Ani DeFranco song. I'm going to date myself. My effort to talk about generational challenges, where she basically just talks about the value of staying flexible and pliable as we age.
Right.
And it was an early lesson for me. And I remember playing it for my mom on a road trip to Taos, mind you.
Oh, wow.
I think you just arrived. And my dear mother said to me, help me remember this. Help me remember to stay flexible into my age. And I would occasionally call that song back up to her and play it for her. And she did indeed stay flexible and pliable into her age. That's passed away. There's hope for us, Maggie. There's hope for us old codgers, is what I'm trying to say.
I don't know very much about, I guess, what the latest generation. So I've got my generation, my son's generation, son and daughter's generation, which is maybe two different generations. I don't know. And then my grandchildren's generation. I mean, basically, by having these relationships with all of them, I have some visibility into what's happening with those generations. But what about the generation behind my grandchildren? Because my grandchildren are adults and they're getting on with their life, and there's a whole new a whole new tribe coming behind them. I don't know very much about that tribe. And there's a lot I don't know about how, we talk about these various generations. Sometimes I think that's kind of bogus, really, that you can't really assign any kind of universal cultural assumptions to a generation because they were all born within a particular set of years. But on the other hand, there does seem to be kind of something going on there. What are we expecting now? Like, the people who are going to be in power 10 years from now are probably not the people who are in power today. A lot of the people who are in the legislatures are pretty old, and they're not going to be around a whole lot longer. So there's going to be a turnover there. What What are those people going to be like? What do we have coming up next?
I mean, there's a lot of nested questions there, right? I mean, the question in England, it, of course, is, does it go to Charles or does it go to William, right? And so when the folks that you're talking about age out of power, does it go to the 20-year younger group or the 35 to 40-year younger group? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't even know what the right answer should be. And my visibility, like, I pay a lot of attention to my niece and nephew. They're 4 and 6. I love tracking what they're up to. And then I've got a whole set of folks that I know that are sort of 20 and north. I don't have any visibility into the group between. So I'm blind to it.
So the 4-year-old and 6-year-old, what political party are they affiliated with?
Encanto, the political Encanto, or the Lin-Manuel Miranda party, as I like to call it. And the party of cuddles.
Well, I have 4 great-grandchildren that I haven't even met yet. I'm scared to death what they're going to be like, considering I know about their genetic structure and where their parents came from. So, oh, God, we're doomed.
You know, we're almost out of time, and we never really talked about who's on Team Smith and who's on Team Rock.
Slap your mammy.
I'm refusing to choose teams on this.
You're agnostic.
There's a lot of opinions out there. As someone else said, I'm happy to let those other opinions be out there. I don't have an opinion on it, but I'm eager to hear other people's, but I don't have one.
You know, my comment today was, I can't believe we're still talking about this.
It's like rich folk problems, and then there's celeb folk problems, and I really don't care.
Yeah.
I thought it was it was a little bit of excitement. And, you know, that awards show is usually you're usually kind of snoozing by the time you get to that point in the show, right? And suddenly Will Smith walks up and just smacks the shit out of Chris Rock. And it's like, wow, that woke me up.
I think he wanted to win an Emmy, for best TV violence. And he's a contender.
I mean, to me, the most interesting thing about it was the narratives that got spun up about how it was staged. That was, to me, the most interesting thing, which is very difficult for me to envision a world in which that would have strategically been staged, right? Like, it's very hard to game out how that would have been advantageous to both of them for them to participate in that staging. But we're in such a world where no matter what happens, man, it was a plan. Someone was
right.
And of course, the answer is no one's in control. That's not. Humans are clumsy, incoherent groups that can't get their shit together. No one's in control, and certainly those two people did not stage that. I mean, I say certainly. It seems very unlikely to me.
Yeah, the setup was staged. I mean, you get Chris Rock on a TV show. I mean, what do you expect him to be singing "Near My God to Thee"? Or
if we had more time, we could have a whole big discussion about insult comedy, which some people don't seem to grasp very well. That it even exists. Or, I had people saying, well, if there is such a thing as insult comedy, there shouldn't be. It should just go away. And I was thinking Don Rickles is turning over in his grave.
Don Rickles was very good at insult comedy.
Boy, he was great. And I don't think Frank Sinatra ever slapped him. Though he might have thought about it.
It just made me think of artwork by Drew Friedman, one of my favorite artists.
Oh, yeah. Well, I believe that we are at the kind of end of the hour here, the end of the road, the end of the hour. We have a few seconds left. Anything else to toss in?
Oh, I like chatting with you guys. Let's do it again sometime.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You need to be a
Definitely.
regular here.
Yeah, I'm glad I was able to make it. So again, apologies for my lateness.
That's all right.
I was stunned and gobsmacked seeing the gorge.
You were
in this-
stylishly late, so you're always
That's right. That's
We're
right.
happy you made it. Okay. Adios, everybody.
Bye.
See you next week. Bye-bye.